Thank you for having me here this evening, giving me the opportunity to speak. As she said, I'm Samantha Hollick. Most people call me Sammy. I was born and raised in Carlsbad, New Mexico, so I've spent the majority of my life in New Mexico. After veterinary school, I went back to Carlsbad and opened a private veterinary practice, and I worked there for 17 years, doing a lot of beef cattle work and also sheep and goats and a variety of other species. So I've grown up in a ranching atmosphere and dealt with a lot of different wildlife that lived on our ranch. And so I'm very familiar with different parts of New Mexico. I just started this job as state veterinarian about a year and a half ago. Definitely been a busy last year or so with avian influenza and other things going on. So now that avian influenza seems to be settling down a little bit, we have another concern that's coming this way from Mexico. And so I'm here tonight to talk to you about New World screwworm. So for anyone who may not be familiar with New World screwworm, it's actually a fly that lays its eggs around any sort of open wound or fresh, like a fresh navel on a calf, or even an ear tagging or branding site. Anywhere that there is blood that attracts the female fly, she will lay 200 or 300 eggs at a time around those areas where there is a break in the skin or some sort of very fragile tissue. Those eggs can hatch out within 12 to 24 hours, and the larvae or the maggots will burrow into the flesh of the animal. And they do eat live flesh, and that's what makes these very different. So most of the maggots and larvae that we see and are used to seeing that get into wounds will just eat the dead and decaying flesh. But these guys they prefer the live flesh. And so they burrow into the healthy tissue of these animals. And we do mostly hear reports of livestock being affected and all types of livestock. But it can actually infest any warm-blooded creature. So that includes people and pets and wildlife. And with wildlife, that can even include birds. So any sort of warm-blooded creature that has an injury or has even a minor wound, such as a tick bite, can attract those female flies to lay their eggs. Now, typically, screwworm is found in South America and the Caribbean, but it has progressed north the last 2 years. It's not found in New Mexico yet. It is a reportable disease, which means if you do find a case of it or you are concerned that you might see a case of it, we do need to be aware here at the Livestock Board, but also at the Department of Health. And so because it can affect people. This does have an economic significance. So mainly because of the damage that it causes to animals when it does cause an infestation, but also because of the impact to the industry. So if we get screwworm in an area of the state, we potentially would have to quarantine that place until we can get the screwworm under control. And those flies can actually cause a lot of damage in a very short time. So within 7 to 14 days of those eggs being laid on the animal and the larvae hatching out, they can actually cause the death of an animal. And baby calves are probably, and lambs are the most susceptible because they're young, they're fragile, and if the flies get in through that umbilical cord or navel, they can get up into the body cavity very quickly and cause death in just a few days. As I said, it can affect more than one species. It can affect our ability to move animals across state lines or through sale barns and things like that, because we don't want to move those animals if they have an infestation of the fly, of the larvae, because we don't want to move that around to different parts of the country and expose other animals. And ultimately, it can affect international trade. And we're seeing that right now with between our country and Mexico. So those southern border ports along our international border between the United States and Mexico are all closed because of we don't want that screwworm fly to come up here into the United States. And we'll talk a little bit more about that here later in the presentation. So screwworm infestations, as I said, they begin when the female fly lays her eggs on a wound or around an orifice. So even like eyes, when you have eyes that are tearing and they're fragile, the flies can lay eggs around that, and those larvae can go right into the eye socket or up into the nose. The picture that you see here is from Florida in 2016 and 17. There were a population of key deer that were affected by screwworm, and the bucks were rutting and they were fighting with each other, and those injuries were great places for those flies to lay their eggs, and then the larvae would burrow in, and you can see that they're actually going into the skull of that deer. So it can become very dangerous in a short amount of time. And that female, she may only live for 20 or 30 days, but in that time she can lay up to 3,000 eggs. So she's spreading this around very quickly. And once the larvae hatch and they feed in the tissue of that animal for about a week, they drop off and go into the ground, and they burrow into the ground and they finish their life cycle. And that can take anywhere from 2 or 3 weeks to up to almost 2 months. And so then they'll come out of the ground and they'll hatch and become adult flies and then continue the life cycle. So that's another reason we don't want animals infested with the larvae to come onto U.S. soil, because we don't want them to drop those larvae onto the ground and have them establish a population within the United States. So the recommended treatment now is ivermectin or something similar like Dectomax. We didn't have that tool previously when we were dealing with screwworm. These are just some other examples. On the left is another one of the key deer where the larvae have eaten in through the skull. On the right is a picture of a bull that was dehorned recently, and those are larvae that are coming out of the hole that goes into the sinus from the horn into the bull's sinus cavity in his face. So with screwworm infestation, the main thing is if you see something, say something. So this is the time of year when we are going to see a lot of larvae and maggots in wounds. But if you see something unusual, the wound is getting bigger, it smells worse than normal, it just won't heal, it's very painful. Those can be indications that this is not just normal maggots that we're dealing with, not normal larvae. So the treatment, of course, is to remove the larvae as much as possible, flush and clean that wound. Any of the larvae can be collected, and we have some kits, and I can send some pictures of these for you guys, but these kits are based on actually a leftover one from 1972 that my dad had from his cattle ranch. So it was kind of an inspiration for me, something I hoped I would never have to use again. But so the kits have a tube and some tweezers to collect the larvae. Oh, let me get this here. So the tweezers can be used to collect the larvae out of the deep parts of the wound, and then they can go into the tube, and then it's just plain rubbing alcohol. So 70% alcohol to go in the tube to kill the larvae and to keep them from decaying. And then we're actually working with our cooperative extension offices. Right now, we're going to be distributing kits to the cooperative extension offices for people to pick up. And so once the sample is collected, it can go into a plastic bag, back into the cardboard tube, and then to the extension office, and then they can get it to the entomologist at Las Cruces, at NMSU in Las Cruces. And she's doing a lot of the identification for us locally to help us get a quicker response in New Mexico if we do find it. And so we do have some more information on that. Like I said, we'll be distributing that to the cooperative extension offices, but I can certainly get some of the information to you as well. I'm waiting on some brochures and posters from USDA that we can also distribute. But so those larvae are what really help us to make that identification. And sometimes we can even get flies collected, and that helps too. So back to the treatment of those animals, you can flush and clean the wound. You can treat it locally with or topically with permethrin, and you can spray that on the entire animal. Permethrin can be sprayed on the barn and the surrounding area to help decrease the flies. Negasont is a medication that we don't have available in this country right now. It is a Coumaphos. And we are working to get emergency approval for that in case we do get screwworm in this country. That is something that animals are dipped in when they go through the ports to come in from Mexico. And so it's limited to the use just at the ports right now and throughout Mexico. But you can also administer ivermectin if the species is okay to receive that. There are some breeds of dogs, so just be really careful if you have any border collies. They do not do well with ivermectin. It can actually cause a toxicity, but there are some other medications that are safe to use in dogs, and so the best thing is to consult a veterinarian about that. Certainly, if the animal dies, it is best to bury it fairly deep so that the larvae cannot come to the surface. And we don't want to perpetuate that, those flies being in the area. So control and eradication through USDA Animal Plant Health Inspection Services, they use sterile insect technique. We're going to talk about that, I think, in the next slide. But also enforcing movement controls in animals. So like I said, if we get a detection of a fly, or the larvae, we don't want to move those animals until we get that infestation under control. So we can treat them and clear them within about 72 hours. So it's not a long period of time that we have to restrict that movement, but it is really important that we restrict it until the larvae are all dead, because we don't want to move that around. We can do passive and active surveillance, which there's different forms of trapping these adult flies if they're in the area. Some of that can be done, but sometimes it's a lot of work, like literally having a piece of liver out there and then waiting for the flies to come in and catching them. There are some easier ways to do that, but it maybe not as accurate for the identification. And then, of course, outreach and education, which is why we're doing the webinar here tonight, is to share information with you about how to find these flies or to detect the larvae if they do get into our animals. And again, it is a reportable disease, so reportable to the New Mexico Livestock Board and the USDA, and also to the Department of Health. So the sterile insect technique is actually something that it was a really important tool for us back in the 50s and 60s when we had screwworm in the United States before. And this allowed us to slowly and steadily push the flies southward through Mexico and Central America and all the way back down to South America. So the way that it works, the female fly only mates once in her lifetime. And by raising these sterile flies. So it's the same type of screwworm, but they're raised in a facility where they get just a tiny little bit of irradiation, to just enough to make them sterile. It's a very small amount. And when they hatch out of go from their pupae into their adult stage, those sterile males then go out into the wild. They're released out into the wild, and they will mate with the wild females, and then her eggs are not fertile. So she'll still go on and lay eggs, but there won't be any larvae that hatch from those. And so slowly over time, we can actually cause the population of the fly to decrease, and we don't have to use any other like chemicals and things to control those populations. And so it's a very good strategy to sort of control them naturally, and to get them out of an area. So with this map, it shows the kind of the progression of how the flies were slowly removed from the United States. So in the late 50s and through the mid 60s, those sterile flies were used to help push those populations south. Now, we did have some reincursions, so flies that they were not born native in the United States, but they came back across from Mexico into the United States. And that happened several times clear into the early 80s. But by the mid 80s and early 90s, we had pushed that fly all the way down through Central America. And then by 2006, it was pushed all the way down south to this little tiny area at the very bottom, to past a line they call the Darien Gap. And so that Darien Gap was maintained with the sterile flies clear up until about 2.5 years ago. And there's one facility in the entire world that produces these sterile flies now. There were several back in the 50s and 60s, but now there's only one. And it's down in Panama, which is this yellow country down here. And that's where they were producing about 20 million flies a week to hold those flies south of the Darien Gap. Over time, though, the flies, the genetics of our flies were not as strong, and the wild flies were getting stronger, and so they were breeding and going past that gap. I do see questions in the chat. Oh, good. Okay. With the sterile flies not being as effective, and then animal movement that was coming across up into Panama, over time, we started to see cases pop up in Panama again. And they stepped up production at that plant. And here's kind of a timeline of what happened. So unfortunately, Panama is kind of hidden under the square, but in February of 2023, they started seeing that increase in the number of cases down here in Panama. By July, it had moved up Panama into Costa Rica, and they were increasing the number of flies produced. They also trapped some wild flies to bring into the facility and to improve the genetics. But animal movement and the spread of the fly at this point was going way too fast. And so by March of 2024, it had made it to Nicaragua, September up to Honduras, and then finally in fall of last year, it made it to Guatemala. And that was a concern for us because Guatemala was the last stop before Mexico. And then in November, sure enough, right along that border between Guatemala and Mexico, they had their very first detection. It was a cow that had moved illegally from Guatemala into Mexico and brought the worm with her. But within a couple of days, there was a native born calf in Mexico that had the larvae in, and from there it just spread. And so these red dots in Mexico kind of represent the distribution of cases. So the concern was that this narrow area here at the edge of the red, and we're going to look at this a little closer, This is the Isthmus of Tehuantepec, and that is the last narrow area of land that we had to potentially stop the progression of flies. And you can see in this map that there are red dots past that area. So on the next, this is a close-up of that particular spot. So this is the Isthmus of Tehuantepec here, and this little green dot right here was the first time in Oaxaca where the flies had passed that barrier, and then eventually they made it to Oaxaca City and to Veracruz. And at that point, that was the second time the border was shut down because we felt the USDA Secretary of Ag felt that Mexico was not making enough effort to control the spread of this in their country. And so she closed the ports again until Mexico stepped up their control and their surveillance. And so they put in more inspection points, and they've increased their surveillance. USDA kind of redirected where they were dropping the flies, and so they've concentrated dropping those sterile flies up in this area around Oaxaca City and Veracruz, and they've been much more successful at keeping the flies south and east of that line. So there are no new cases past that line now. These numbers are a little bit outdated, but mainly it just gives you an idea of how severe it has been. So Panama was over 40,000 cases back in April. And as you move further north, the number of cases decrease. I will tell you that Belize is now well over 100 cases. But the thing to see is that cattle were the #1 reported species in all of those countries. And dogs were often second. Pigs were in there as well. When we look specifically at Mexico, their first case was diagnosed in November 2021. As of the middle of this month, they were up to over 2,200 cases. Now, those are not all active. Many of those have been treated and cleared, but they have about 270 active cases right now. The majority of those are in cattle, overwhelming majority in cattle. And after that, it's horses, pigs, and dogs, and then a few sheep and goats. There was also a hawk, a wild hawk that was found. That bird apparently had a broken wing and was down, and the screwworm larvae had infested that bird as well. As I mentioned, most of the fly infestations and larvae infestations are in the navel or the umbilical cord. Otherwise secondary to either trauma or some of the common management practices like dehorning and ear tagging. 7 of the states in Mexico have been affected now. As I said, the farthest north it's made it is Veracruz. And it was pretty frightening when Mexico got it because the number of cases was increasing as fast as 25% a week. That has slowed down significantly, but they still are getting new cases. Control measures, as I mentioned, they've got a lot of inspection points. They have actually started using dogs at the inspection points to help pick up on the infestations very quickly because the dogs can smell that better than we can. They are using ivermectin and doramectin, which is Dectomax. And Dectomax does seem to be working better than ivermectin at controlling the larvae, killing off the larvae that are deep in those wounds. The facility in Panama, referred to as COPEG, is maxed out, producing 100 to 110 million flies per week. And all of those right now are going to Mexico to try to help push this further south. So that's 44 flights per week, typically, that are going up there. And they're flying 7 days a week. They're not taking any sort of a break. USDA does cover the majority of the cost of that plant in Mexico, or sorry, in Panama. They are putting money towards a facility in Mexico that was a fruit fly facility, and they're going to convert it over to make more screwworm flies. But that will take probably at least a year to get that facility up and running. This might be a little more detailed than most of you want, but it's just to give you an idea. The planes are dropping these flies approximately 3,000 flies per nautical mile, and up to 6,000 flies per nautical mile where they have more animals and humans or an increased number of cases. So they're doing their best to try to get these flies out as much as possible. And as I said, they moved that fly drop zone up beyond that isthmus to help control it. Now, USDA did identify a location in Texas called Moore Air Force Base where they have a place they're going to convert into a distribution center. So they won't make flies there initially, but they can actually fly cases of the unhatched flies to Texas and then allow them to hatch and then distribute them from Texas south. So if we need to move that distribution further, closer to the United States, we can do that. They expect to have that facility ready by the end of this year. And they may look at also making it a production facility, but that will take 2 to 3 years to get that going. So I stated this a little bit earlier, but just to kind of go over it again, the 3 big priorities for controlling this is better surveillance, so that we really need to find those cases. Better movement controls in Mexico would be helpful. We are aware there's still a lot of illegal animal movement, which does not help this event. And then if we could increase production of flies, that would be great. We're kind of at the limit of what we can produce right now until we build another facility. And just to give you an idea, right now with what they are producing, it's only about 20% of what USDA was producing back in the 60s when we eradicated it from the United States. So we really have got to work towards building more facilities that can breed more of these flies. And obviously the concerns, political climate in Mexico and in the United States plays a big role in this. And we're trying to work past that and through that. Financial constraints for us. So there's only so much money we can shuffle around. USDA has done a tremendous job of getting some of the emergency funds available to help fight this. There's a staffing shortage both at the state and federal level, which creates some challenges. One of the reasons our southern border ports between the United States and Mexico had to close was because we don't have enough USDA personnel to really fully inspect those animals in great numbers. They have done a tremendous job with when they did reopen the ports for a couple of months there, but we just can't cross the number of cattle that we were crossing before, because every single one of those animals has to be inspected before they can come across. Communication has been really slow with Mexico, and so that's made it difficult for us to make decisions about how we can prepare ourselves here. So we basically have to prepare for the worst and hope for the best. And so trying to get education and outreach first and foremost. We've met with some of our Border Patrol and Border Protection folks just to help teach them what to look for, who to call if they see something that they're concerned about, how to collect samples if necessary. And it's been a long time since any of us have seen New World screwworm. Most of us now were not alive when that came through back in the 50s and 60s. There are a few people who did deal with this, like clear into the, like I said, 70s and 80s. And those who have dealt with it, it has really, it left a lasting impact on them. So they certainly don't want to see it come back into this country. There are concerns with closing the border and not allowing those feeder cattle to come in because limiting trade has a lot of consequences. But we just cannot afford to have this get into our U.S. cattle population or our sheep and goats and other livestock. So at this point, we do feel like we are not as prepared as we should be. We're working towards becoming more prepared, but we are highly susceptible. And it's not just the livestock. You know, we have wildlife that cross the border, and that is a concern because wildlife can be exposed to it and bring it into this country as well, pets and people too. And so I feel like those are some really high risk situations for us. And again, for us, our southern border ports, Santa Teresa is the largest port in the country to move cattle. We usually bring in over 600,000 head of feeder cattle through that port every year. They're often crossing 1,600 head a day when they're in full operation, plus horses. We cross sometimes 20 or 30 horses a week through those ports. And so there's a lot of animals that typically come through there, which right now all of those ports are standing empty. So with that, then I will open it up for questions.
That was a lot of information.
I'm sorry, I know that is a lot.
No, it's fine. What I questioned about was, I know you were talking about the larvae, but like how do they look like in their adult stage? Like, is there something that we should also consider as producers ourselves, like to look out for? Any specific
Yeah,
on them that we should, help us identify them ourselves?
the flies do look a little bit different, but it's really hard to tell them apart. I'm trying to get back to, let me share this screen with you. This picture I had in my presentation. It's so this is the screwworm fly in the picture here in the corner. Um, I I don't have any good side-by-side pictures handy, but I can get those to you. There was recently a document shared that has a comparison between a green bottle fly that we would more commonly see, that really shiny green metallic, very smooth, uh, glossy metal look to their body, and those are very common. The screwworm fly, if you were to look straight on at the back of this, it has 3 black stripes on the body between the head and the wings. And these red eyes are very characteristic. They're much bigger than what we would see on the green bottle fly. Um, and so, but it's just really hard to tell in the field. Now, there is also a different species of screwworm fly that is typical to see here, and they call it a secondary screwworm. Those flies look almost identical to the New World screwworm flies. You need a magnifying glass or a microscope to see the differences in the facial characteristics and the body. I think there's some very subtle changes on the body that they can tell them apart. And so it's really important that we don't necessarily rely just on field identification of the fly or the larvae themselves. The larvae are going to look very similar to other maggots that we see. Again, there are some very tiny differences that if you've got a good magnifying glass, you might be able to see it in the field. But the main characteristic is that they are really digging down into that healthy flesh, places that they wouldn't normally go. And from what I understand, like if you flush the wound, most maggots you can just flush them out with water, and very little effort to shake them loose out of that wound. But these screwworm maggots, because of the little hairs on their body and the way that they dig in, they don't flush out the same way because they're really dug into that tissue.
Mhm. It looks like an ordinary housefly.
Yes,
But okay.
that is the
Okay.
concern, right?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think I've seen some in my area, but I don't think it's a screwworm, but hopefully not, knock on wood. So Martin, I think you meant to have this in the chat, but not directly. Um, okay, I think Samantha, you already talked about this, but size and looks of larvae and what would be the typical behavior of an affected animal?
So the larvae, at their largest, they're going to be about a centimeter and a half. So just a little over half an inch in length. But when they first hatch out, they're going to be very, very tiny. But they'll grow up to about that, half an inch or so in length at the most. So again, very tiny, hard to tell. The behavior of the animal, though, they are going to be more painful than normal. They might, if it's around their face, like sometimes it'll get down in the ear canal. They might shake their head a lot more. They may rub on things. They're going to try to, because they can feel that the larvae that are digging into their flesh. So it's very painful. You may see more infection than normal because they're damaging that healthy tissue. And so there's some secondary infection that develops. Um, they might even run a fever with it, which is not normal to with a normal fly infestation. You're not usually going to have a fever unless there's another disease going on. So with these screwworm flies, they can, because they lead to that secondary infection, you can actually see fever with this. But the main thing is that wound will grow and grow and grow because those larvae continue to eat out into the healthy tissue. So if you're treating and cleaning a wound and it's continuing to get bigger, that's a problem.
And you said one about the control measures. You said that ivermectin or doramectin would be effective, right?
Right. The both of those, if you use the injectable versions of both of those, they are much more effective than just a topical treatment or even a pour-on because you need to get high enough blood levels in the animal to circulate in that tissue to kill the larvae. And sometimes pour-on won't give you as high of a level.
Okay. So you just prefer injection instead of the topical.
Right. Now, if you're if you're just trying to prevent flies, you can use your pour-ons and different sort of fly tags or permethrins that you can spray on to help keep the flies away. And that's a great strategy to prevent those flies from coming in. But if you do get an infestation, the injectable ivermectin or doramectin work best. Now, I will tell you, none of those things are labeled in the United States to treat screwworm. They do have that label in other countries, but not in the United States. And that's something USDA is working on right now to get a list of things that will be acceptable and have a label to treat.
So they don't have that permethrin in like any of the feed stores that we have out here?
Permethrin is available over the counter, and
Okay.
there's label instructions for other types of flies, and so you can follow those label instructions. It's just that we don't have any products specifically labeled to treat or prevent screwworm.
Okay. But there's no like new information that it has hit in New Mexico, right?
Correct. And
Okay.
we've had some samples submitted from along the southern part of the state, as well as even up around Albuquerque and Santa Fe, because people are watching, right? They're looking for it, and all of those samples so far have been negative. They've been either a secondary screwworm or just your common green bottle fly.
So for those of the folks that are on here, do you recommend that they take, the sample to your office, or is it more of New Mexico State University?
Ideally, we need to get it to New Mexico State University, but we do encourage you to call our office so that we're aware the sample is coming in, because we're trying to coordinate with NMSU with Dr. Johnson to make sure that she knows those samples are coming her way. And then she is trying to make sure that she gets the results reported to us quickly. So that way, if we do have a positive, we're ready to roll out and try to make sure we get it under control before it spreads too far. So
Okay. Okay. All right. Is there any questions from our audience tonight that has?
Yes, this
Okay,
Virginia.
Virginia. Go ahead.
Virginia. I was just going to add that there is an injectable Ivermec, and I don't know about Dexomex, but I know they work great on just internal parasites. Also,
yes.
the other question I have was that the control measure, when you talked about the drop flies, those you're talking about the sterile flies, right?
Yes, ma'am, the sterile flies.
Okay, so is there a chance that these flies would crossbreed with other species, other in the same family?
Um, I I don't, I'm not aware of them crossbreeding with other species. Now, the males can mate multiple times, the sterile males.
Uh-huh.
And so I suspect even if they did breed, like with a secondary screwworm fly, it's not going to affect their ability to still breed with a wild New World screwworm fly. Um, and there are sterile females that are released as well, because they don't have a way to sort out the males from females in this process. But those sterile females cannot reproduce. So there's no issue with those reverting back to being fertile.
Okay. My other question is the female and the female fly and the male is there a difference in like we can, if you were to show us a picture, which is a female and the other is a male, are they different?
I don't believe so. I think their appearance is the same.
Yeah.
In all the materials that USDA has shared with us, they've not shown a difference.
Okay. Thank you.
Yes, ma'am, you're welcome.
Thank you, Virginia. Terrell, I'll have you share your question.
Well, can you hear me?
Yes.
Okay, great. So my question was, for the control of sterile males, we have the genetic approach, and then we have chemical approach of ivermectin and fluoromectin for the worms. What other parts of the life cycle are being researched to control their population?
That's a really good question. So there is some new technology with CRISPR where they can actually edit the genes of the flies to produce sterile flies rather than
Wow.
have to go through the irradiation process. But that's still very early in development. But that is something they're looking at to try to help improve or increase the production of those flies. And then also for us, as I mentioned, there's at these facilities they can't sort out the males and females, and the limiting step at the production facility is the irradiation part of it because they can only irradiate so many pupae at a time. So if they were able to, with CRISPR, if they were able to go in and raise only male flies, then they could double their capacity just, by not putting the females through that process. And so that would really help with the number of flies being distributed that are actually out there doing their job.
I'm familiar with CRISPR, very interesting research topic for cell biology.
Yes,
So, okay, thank you.
you're welcome.
Hi, Samantha. This is Sammy. This is Marjorie Lantana. It's nice to see you again. I have a couple questions. Number one is this screwworm, the new screwworm, did impact our cattle market, right? And because I know we're in demand of beef, and the prices are just so they're just good, good for people that are selling at this time. And some of us, we won't be marketing our calves until this fall. Anyhow, I think this is a very good educational information that you're providing us, and I just wish that more and more producer would have jumped on. Although I shared this information with all the producers that are raising cattle out there. We must all help each other to observe what's around us. So once something happens, just we knock on wood, we don't want it to happen. Well, the cattle prices drop. And then another thing too, the other question is, well, a concern. It's just a concern. The political and climate. I know we are really fighting not individual to cross the border. I'm just thinking, well, Mexico just send us some screwworm flies to us just to battle with us. That's just comes to my mind now. Like, if they can't get this thing settled, we'll just release some screwworm flies to them. I'm just thinking that might happen. Hopefully it does not too. And then the other question, well, actually, the other thing that I wanted to share, I guess you're talking about 1960, there was a history of screwworm. And that's probably when I was maybe 6 years old or 7 years old. I remember it just seems like it was a huge concern. Our community had hauled some of our cows to a central location to dip these cows into I did see it. I remember seeing it was a big old container, and they pushed these cows deeply into the dipping solution, and they jump right back out. I'm just thinking, was this the time that maybe the screwworm was around and people had raised flag that a lot of these local producers had to run these cattle through a dipping? That I remember. It's just a little thing that I recall. So when this thing came up, and then I thought maybe that's what happened that time. I remember my parents hauling some of their cows to a central location where they provided this facility. It was a portable facility that they provided. Anyhow, that was just one of the history, and it caught my mind. So, and I really appreciate you sharing this with us again, and we'll continue to network with our leadership, and especially under the Navajo Nation. So thank you again. And I guess the question was, the cattle market is so great now, and it's only because that we're not importing some beef from other areas. And are we exporting some beef down to Mexico at this point in time? So I guess I have a lot of thing that's just popping up in my mind right now. But thank you if you have the answers for us, Sammy.
Yes, ma'am. It's good to hear your voice, Marjorie.
Thank you.
Yes, the market is certainly something we worry about because our markets are good right now, like you said, because we're not importing cattle. So we're having to provide those feeder cattle that would normally have come from Mexico to keep our markets going. And so our prices are really good right now. We have historically, yes, we've exported beef to Mexico, and I think there is still some of that going on. Obviously, they have a lot of cattle there right now, so they are, and they do send us some good quality feeder cattle. It's surprising what comes across, or what was coming across the border. So they're hanging on to those feeder cattle and making use of them in Mexico, but certainly they're eager to reestablish that market. And the concern for us, if we get screwworm in our country, is what happens to our exports, because we may be faced with our export markets being temporarily shut off. So Canada, for example, we export a lot of beef to several countries, and we are looking at ways to manage it. If we get screwworm in this country, if we can regionalize it, so the quicker we find a detection and stop the movement out of that area until we can get those animals treated, the better. And if we can isolate it to a specific region, then we might still be able to market cattle from other parts of the United States. But it all really depends on how quickly we respond and control it. And that's where Mexico has probably been the weakest on their response and control and surveillance, and that has really caused a lot of issues for their export market. And those dipping vats, you remember, that probably was related to screwworm. They also use that to treat ticks. So cattle that come across from Mexico typically go through a dipping vat before they come into the United States. And that historically has been for the fever tick, but also other types of ticks that might be on those cattle. And it can help to reduce the risk of screwworm as well. It doesn't get into the deep part of the wound, but it does get to whatever is on the surface.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
Okay, so is there any more questions before we wrap it up? We'll take one more question. Okay. All right. Well, I just want to say thank you so much for all of the questions that we had for tonight. That's really good. I really like how a lot of you guys are engaging. So that's exactly how I pictured it. So I really appreciate it. And thank you again, Samantha, for coming on here tonight. I know how busy you are, so I just wanted to say thank you for
Well,
taking the time, especially in the evening time where it's 5:30 and you're like, okay, well, I'm not quite off work yet. So
it's all good. Thank you very much for having me. I appreciate the opportunity to speak with everyone, and certainly feel free to share my contact information. If anyone has any questions, I'd be glad to help.
Sure will. Thank you so much, Samantha.
Thank you.
Okay, so we'll go ahead and conclude our presentation for tonight. So I just wanted to give you guys a little bit of a heads up what we have for the end of this, well, actually the following month. So we don't have any other webinars or workshops that are going to be shared for this month. So for next month, we do have the first one, actually, it should be flipped around, will be the Rangeland Weed Identification and Management webinar. This is tailored for, tribal ranchers that want to have some weeds identified. We do have Dr. Leslie Beck, who is the Extension Weed Specialist from NMSU, going to be providing this webinar, as well as identifying and how to manage certain weeds that we have growing in our Four Corner region. So this is a webinar. It's going to be taking place at 5:30. If you are tuning in on your desktop, go ahead and bring out your phone and scan that QR code, and it will lead you directly to our homepage where you can register on that survey. Or if you are tuning in from your iPhone or your Android, go ahead and head over to our nsa.nmsu.edu under upcoming events, and there will be a registration link there. So for our in-person, this is going to be on a Sunday. This is not on a weekday, just FYI for a reminder. If you are pretty much local in the Crown Point area, there will be a just plain introduction on who we are as a project, and as well as our conservation planning program and what that has to offer for a lot of our grazing permits holders. So some of you may have questions about how to complete your conservation plans. And our specialist here, Miss Shirley Toth, who's actually on here tonight, she's going to be providing that information later down on that day on July 6th from starting 1 p.m. to 3 p.m. So all the topics that's going to be shared is our goals and objectives, how we're going to do our audience outreach. If you want to collaborate and have a workshop be hosted at your chapter, feel free to contact me. And she'll also take your information if you tend to be there. And she's in charge of our conservation planning program, and she will go through with you exactly how we conduct our conservation plans with our producers and how we are in a relationship with the BIA Natural Resource Department. So this will be in Standing Rock. I couldn't really, give you directions, but I did the best that I can. So it's going to be 22 miles west on Route 9 if you're starting from Crown Point. So it will be at Standing Rock Chapter House. It's not Shiprock, so a lot of people get mixed up about that, but it's Standing Rock. Okay, so I did touch base on a little bit of the conservation planning program. This is for grazing permit holders, farm holders as well. Mainly the farms are located in the San Juan area, which is the Northern Navajo Agency. So Eastern Agency will be like in Crown Point and such. So if you are a grazing permit holder and you are in need of a conservation plan, I know how you feel about their BIA's template can be really, mind-boggling. So we do this free of charge, and we do have technicians on our team to assist you with that. So if you are in need of assistance, definitely contact Shirley Toth. Her email is toth@nmsu.edu. All right, so we'll wrap it up here. Our information is going to be found on our Facebook page. If you follow us on Facebook under Navajo Sustainable Agriculture Project, you will see all of our upcoming events beforehand, around about 1 to 2 weeks out for our webinars. Then we also have our in-person workshops that are going to be 1 month out. And all of our webinars are recorded and shared on our YouTube channel. So be on the lookout for that, and that will be posted on our Facebook page as well. So if any of you on here want to have a copy of the slides, I'm more than happy to provide you a copy. I will be sending out polls to each and every one of you. Unfortunately, I did not have it on tonight. That's embedded it, so I will just email it directly to you guys. So other than that, I just want to say thank you to everyone for coming on here, and I hope you have a good rest of your evening. Thank you.
Thank you.
Project called the Navajo Sustainable Agriculture Project. In short, we're called the NSA Project. We're under the New Mexico State University Cooperative Extension Service, and we are funded by the USDA Outreach and Assistance for Native Farmers and Ranchers and Veterans Farmers and Ranchers Program. So we do a lot of collaboration with Diné College Land Grant Office, and as well as COPE, which stands for Community Outreach and Patient Empowerment. These two entities, the COPE is stationed out from Gallup, and we do have the LGO office that are stationed out in Tsaili, which is their main campus, Diné College. Then they also have several small campuses that are across Eastern and Northern Navajo agencies. So we do partner a lot with their specialists that are specializing in livestock or crop related fields. So one of the goals that we provide for our producers is education. So is help them improve their operations, both profitability and sustainability. So we do follow the needs of our producers, where maybe they want to learn about areas where you can vaccinate cattle or sheep, or if it's like 4-H club lambs, where do you vaccinate that? What is the protocol for supplementations for my replacement heifers, or how would I would like to know more about how to start off my spring vegetable gardening. So areas like that, some of you that have participated in our in-person workshops, you've been familiar with our surveys at the end. So all the surveys and the polls that we gather from each of these webinars or in-person workshop is what we go based off of for the entire year. So it's going to be new for those of you that are on here for the first time. So all I'm just going to ask is just your feedback on the presentation for tonight, how well you understand it, as well as other topics that you want us to take a deeper dive into, as well as where we're reaching out to you. So if you're from Gallup, then you put down Gallup. If you're from Las Cruces, you put Las Cruces. So secondly, we do help our producers' knowledge in the increase in the USDA programs and services. Everyone on here are pretty much familiar with NRCS and FSA. RD stands for Rural Development, and RMA is Risk Management Agencies. So we've been providing this as a resource fair virtually. ever since COVID, we've been having this virtually, and we just haven't really had the time to make this in person until this year. So we're definitely going to aim for this to be in person for everyone that would like to attend. So we're still in the midst of having this brought hopefully in the Eastern Agency area, and maybe have one in the Northern Agency. So not only invite USDA programs, but also other resource providers such as the Navajo Nation Department of Agriculture, and having them bring out what type of programs that they also have to offer. I think some of you on here as Native ranchers are familiar with the Agriculture Infrastructure Fund for both livestock and crop production. So we're gearing up for that to be in person. So we'll let out the information more until later on down the road in these several months. So lastly, increase the local production and consumption of fresh fruits and vegetables and healthy food by Navajo families and individuals. So we do use expertise from COPE, who are a lot familiar with horticulture. I myself, I am no expert in horticulture. I pretty much have, not the green thumb in my family. I, kill herbs on top of my kitchen area. So don't trust me with your herbs or any, I guess, produce. So I am just a beginner gardener, so I'm trying my best. But we do have folks coming from COPE who are a lot knowledgeable in that area. And so we use their expertise to have them showcased on food preservations. We do have them introduce what type of seeds to plant during or before seed or spring preparation. Is there water catchment system that you want to implement in your small scale backyard gardening and so forth? So we use a lot of their expertise as well as those that are coming from Diné College. And of course, we do have expertise that are coming from New Mexico State University specialists. So I believe as Marie Thompson is one of them. She is no stranger to our webinars, so she provides a lot of great information on horticulture. So I'd be happy to share more information with you on what events that we have for the month of July. And as we go, I will be posting some events on our Facebook platform. So, but I'll share some after this webinar. First and foremost, I work for